Criminally underrated watches. Today we're going to be talking about watches that I think are very underrated and should not be, because they are not only very important watches, but also very well designed. These are all personal picks, so obviously there are a lot of other watches out there that could be added to this list, but I think these are some watches that are not only underrated, but could be future classics. So without further ado, let's get into my list of criminally underrated watches. So my first pick on this list is, of course, a watch that I own. It is the SLQ from Seiko. This is one of the coolest watches that Seiko has ever made, in my opinion. It's also referred to as the Jay Leno. If you've ever seen pictures of Jay Leno, there are a lot of pictures out there of him wearing a Seiko SLQ. I think that one is the 001, but it could be the 007. I'm not entirely sure which exact model he wears. So what's special about the SLQ, besides the fact that Jay Leno wears one? Well, it's a very unique design. You have 4 different sub-registers. They are built into the case rather than having a large sapphire crystal that houses a dial. There are 4 separate dials, and you also have a little window for the date, and this is actually a date that looks good because it really adds to the aesthetic of the watch. These are all integrated bracelet chronographs, and they are powered by a very special movement that Seiko don't make anymore, and I think a lot of people don't realize how high-end this movement was. It's a 1/10 second chronograph, and it is the 9T82. This was a Grand Seiko level movement that they put into a Seiko. This is a 9T. When you talk about Grand Seiko movements, they start with a 9. This movement also started with the 9. It was a really nicely finished kinetic movement. A kinetic movement is an auto quartz. It's powered by a battery, but it's also powered by the movement of your wrist. So when you move it around, you move the watch around, the rotor winds and it powers a generator inside the watch, and that is a little cell, basically a battery, and it is pretty hard to replace those batteries. So when you go in places like eBay, a lot of these watches aren't working 100%. I actually made a video about these watches, but the movement is made in Japan. It's hand assembled, and like I said, it's decorated. It's also accurate to plus or minus 15 seconds per month. It's good looking, and you can see it from the back. I just think they're beautiful watches. You may or may not like the looks of these watches because they are somewhat polarizing. If you're like me and you think they're beautiful, these could one day become collector's items because they are something very special. They're something that Seiko will probably never do again. So the last watch that we talked about is a Seiko. Those watches, very unique looking and somewhat affordable. You can get ones for around $1,000 going up to $5,000 depending on the condition and whether or not you get box and papers. The next watch is on the more expensive side, but when you consider what you are getting, I think these are a future classic, and prices on these right now aren't terrible, and possibly in the future I think they will go up. I'm talking about the Ressence Type 1001. Sometimes they're referred to as the Type 0 or the 1002, depending on the color. But essentially what this is the original Ressence. This is a Ressence with a crown. It's essentially the same look as current Ressence. So you have all the functions on the dial separated out. It's basically a really cool futuristic looking regulator that is based on a very standard movement like the ETA 2824. And you have these lightweight aluminum discs that are separated on the dial for each one of the functions of the watch. They all rotate on ceramic ball bearings. It's sort of like a satellite system. It's a very unique way of telling the time. Ressence is an independent brand. They are based in Belgium. This is a distinctive looking watch, and again, it's their first watch. So that's why I think it's important. Also, prices on these aren't terrible. You can get these for under $10,000 sometimes, which when you're considering how much the new versions cost. So if you wanted a time-only version of their latest creation, which is their most affordable watch, those start at $14,000. So this is a Neo Classic, and you can get these for around $10,000. Honestly, I do think that these will be collectible in the future. Another really cool watch that I love to talk about here on my channel is the IWC Ingenieur. And the main reason for that is because its cousins, the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, were both designed by Gerald Genta. This watch, the Ingenieur, also designed by Gerald Genta. However, because it doesn't have AP or Patek Philippe on the dial, it sells for way less money. Neo vintage versions, not the current versions that recently came out. I'm talking about the older versions that came out in the 2000s or mid 2000s. Those are bargain watches, and they're different sizes, different colors, different materials, different complications that you can buy. They make split-second chronographs, they make time only, they make dive watch versions. There's tons of different versions of the Ingenieur that you can buy, but I would say the standard time only in stainless steel or titanium is a bargain at secondary market prices. One that I owned, which was on the larger side, was the Mission Earth. That was a 45mm watch. They make smaller versions of that watch that you can get for around $2,000 to $3,000. They don't get in-house movements. They had standard movements back then. They were ETA based. I have a perpetual calendar that I paid a lot less than I would have if I bought it new. Obviously, they don't currently make this, but they've come out with other perpetual calendars that cost in the tens of thousands of dollars. I paid around $14,000 for my perpetual calendar, which is amazing. I'll put a link to that video up above so you can see the watch that I'm talking about. It's incredible. The next watch that I want to talk about is from a brand that I love. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that I love Vacheron. I talk about Vacheron here on my channel very often because I think the brand as a whole is somewhat underrated. When you compare it to the other watches in the Holy Trinity, I do think that they are underrated, but there is a watch in their arsenal, in their history, that is very underrated, and that is the Phidias. This is a watch that I've talked about here on my channel from time to time. They made world time versions, they've made chronographs, they've made time onlys, they've made dress watch versions. This was sort of a bridge between the 222 and the modern day overseas. So this was the watch that was somewhere in between those two models. It is a rounded case. It's an integrated bracelet watch. However, no one ever talks about these watches. You hear people talk about the 222, you obviously hear people talk about the overseas, but no one talks about the Phidias. And these are watches that you can get in two-tone for under $10,000 and in full gold for around $10,000. And sometimes a little bit more than that. If it's a chronograph, they're a little bit more expensive. If they're the time only, you can get those for around $10,000. Definitely has a little bit of a 90s or 1980s nostalgic look to it. So if you like that look, you're definitely going to like this. It's not the 222, and it's definitely not as good looking as the 222, and it's not the overseas. It's not as modern as the overseas, but it's somewhere in the middle, and you are not paying the price. And maybe one day they're going to reissue this watch and the prices will skyrocket. It's a very cool watch that could definitely eventually get some attention, and I just wanted to bring it up here on this underrated list. The next watch on this list is a watch that I have been looking at for a very long time, and I think it's a really, just a very cool watch. It is the Omega de Ville Hour Vision. If you're not familiar with this watch, it was actually a very important watch to Omega. Basically, you're getting a very unique case design. And that's not what makes this very important, but the case design is very unique. You're getting a sapphire case. Now, it doesn't look like a sapphire case because they do use metal components, so stainless steel components in the design of this case, but it starts out with a sapphire ring. So that is essentially the barrel of the case. Then you have a case back, and then there's a top to the case, which includes the lugs. So essentially the mid case on this watch is completely in sapphire. You also have a sapphire crystal on the front, obviously, and a sapphire crystal on the back. This was the pinnacle at the time from Omega. This is where they introduced what they would be doing for the next number of years. It has an Art Deco design. It's in 41 millimeters. You can see the movement not only from the back, but also from the sides. Like I said, with that sapphire crystal, it really is very cool. And they are very affordable, around $3,000, depending on the condition. You can get them even cheaper than that on places like eBay and Chrono24. So I definitely recommend checking these watches out if you want an Omega that is extremely unique, but also very important, because this was a very important watch for Omega. The next watch on this list is another watch that I own. It is the Urwerk 103. The Urwerk 103 is a very important watch for Urwerk because they were going out of business and they came up with the 103, the design of the 103. And essentially what happened was they came up with two prototypes of this watch in stainless steel. And they were able to market those to ADs in order to sell the gold versions. So they had these two stainless steel versions. They were only going to sell these in white gold or yellow gold. I think it was yellow gold at the time. And they didn't have physical models to sell. They were going to go out of business, and they went all in on the 103, and it turned out to be a very big success. And it actually saved the brand. But that's not really what makes it important. What also makes it important, besides the design and how popular it became, it's also the watch that inspired MB&F. Because when Max Buser got his hands on the 103, he was so inspired by it, he decided to start his own brand, and that was MB&F. Really impressive when you think about it. They are still very expensive because most 103s are made in precious metals. So they are basically a brick of gold. So they are somewhat expensive, but such an important watch, such a good looking watch, or at least in my opinion. I know some people don't like them, but they are a wandering hour. There's a sapphire crystal that's usually kind of oddly shaped on the front, depending on the version that you're looking at. And then of course you have the dashboard on the back. It's kind of a polarizing design. I think it's beautiful and also obviously very important. And that's why I actually own this watch. I love it. Last but not least, I want to talk about two watches that are modern that you can buy from the brands directly today. The first watch is the Bel Canto. I really do think that the Bel Canto will be a future classic. And as they change the Bel Canto and they come out with a version 2 maybe in the future, I think that this is going to be somewhat of an important watch. I think it's very underrated, even though a lot of people rate this watch very, very high. I think that we underestimate still how important this watch is because it is a pivotal moment for Christopher Ward. And I really do think Christopher Ward going forward will be a very important brand to collectors. The Bel Canto is a watch that brought design and complication to the masses. And I say the masses, yes, it is an expensive watch, but when you're considering how good it looks, who actually makes these watches, and the complication that it has in hour striker, it is a pretty amazing watch. And I still think, even though they are, like I said, very highly rated by a lot of people, they are technically kind of underrated. And the last watch on this list, I just want to bring up a very affordable watch. That is the Marlin Jet. I talk about the Marlin Jet here on my channel a lot. I love the dial design, that bowl shape with the indices that are sitting within the bowl, and you have that beautiful boxed domed acrylic crystal. It's powered by an automatic movement, just retro goodness. And I think they're a great watch, and eventually I think these will become a classic, an icon for Timex. So I did want to bring that up because they're just fantastic watches, and they are very affordable. You can get them for around $250, somewhere in that range, depending on the version. They're coming out with a lot of new versions of it as well, a chronograph and special editions. So there are a few versions out there now. Just a fantastic watch that I love. Anyway, guys, tell me what you think down in the comments below. I mentioned a few watches in this video. I know I could mention a lot more watches. Tell me what you think I should add to a part 2. If I were to create a part 2 of this video, tell me what you would include in that video down in the comment section below. That's really it, guys. Thank you for logging on. Thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon. It is super helpful for the channel, and I very much appreciate it. Anyway, guys, thank you for logging on. I'll catch you guys in the next video.